mature and operational Zeta pod so that I can extract its primary fuel cell. Sounds like a lot of work. Why don't we just ask them nicely for one?
Commander, pay attention.
What can I say about the Transformers movie? No, really, what can I say that millions of other people haven't already said? Years before its release, the movie had already developed a controversial reputation, with early drafts worrying both hardcore fans and the general movie viewing public with how little they had to do with the series. You think the final product had issues with canon? The first scripts wouldn't even let the robots speak. But the Witwiki really hit the fan when Michael Bay was announced to direct. A director-producer who was already well known by this point for his flashy, pandering, arguably exploitive take on movies, including other middling to terrible remakes that had soured fans on the idea of him in control of yet another franchise reboot. Nevertheless, the movie went into production and was officially released in July of 2007 to a mixed reaction, to say the least. Even to this day, I don't think there's a solid general consensus for this movie. Some say it's one of their favorite movies ever. Some say it's one of the worst movies they've ever seen. Some say it's a faithful update of what was an outdated concept. Some say it's Transformers in name only. Some say it's a wild thrill ride with a great balance of human and robot characters. Some say it's a mind-numbingly boring cringe fest that puts the stupid human characters in the foreground while reducing the Transformers to sidekicks, at best. It's good, it's bad, it's awesome, it's terrible, it's meh, it's somewhere on the scale between at least two of those descriptors. It's possibly the most divisive movie I'm aware of, with no two people having the same opinion. Though I have noticed that, as time has gone on, newer fans do seem to have a more positive opinion than the original theater goers. Personally, I think it's a movie. I don't know, it's about a bunch of robots fighting for control of Earth while a bunch of stupid humans get in the way. Which sums up most of the other Transformers media, if I'm not mistaken. I ask because I've never really gotten into the franchise, though not for lack of trying. I have seen parts of several shows, read several of the comics, and I think Beast Wars held my attention the longest, but on the whole, my reaction to anything Transformers related has just been meh. The movie never made any impact on me, but I can see why fans hold it up as either a glowing landmark in the franchise, or a terrible skid mark best written out of continuity. And it did leave an impact with the media industry in general. It showed that toy-based movies could be profitable again. And I highly doubt that the Lego movie, the Angry Birds movie, or the Trolls movies would have happened if not for Transformers. Not to mention the renewed interest in Transformers and other toy lines, which led to multiple critically acclaimed shows that probably wouldn't have happened otherwise. So, whether the first Transformers movie is good or bad, it could be argued that it strangely shaped media for the better. And a no-brainer explosion fest resulted in some of the most smartly written, fan-beloved shows and movies of the next decade. And it began the career of a certain completely uncontroversial critic of nostalgia, who has served as the face and model of online reviewers in general, for better and for worse. So, while the debate rages on if the movie is a great or terrible adaptation of the source material, I think we can all agree that it's an important movie. The sequels, however, are indefensible. And it was equally as important to the Asylum, who, knowing a surefire blockbuster when they saw one, immediately got to work to produce their own take on alien robots invading Earth and trampling on humans. The project that would soon be known to many as Transmorphers. Yep, this is it. While the studio was already well known within the industry for its cash-in gimmick and ease of profit, this was the movie that would put them on the map, making the Asylum a household name and cementing the term Mockbuster in the common lexicon. It's the first of two, maybe three, Asylum movies people actually know by name, and probably the reason you've been following this retrospective to begin with. Does it deserve to stand out from the studio's enormous catalog, to the point it's arguably become their unofficial mascot? And, most importantly, was it worth sitting through me rambling and complaining about dozens of mediocre fantasy and horror flicks to finally get to the review you've been waiting for? Well, let's assemble, roll out, and whatever other catchphrases the franchise has given us. In 2009, scientists sent a message of peace to a planet that was recently discovered to contain intelligent life. Unfortunately, the footage contained a copy of Terminator Salvation, so 5 years later, the aliens rightfully conquered Earth, killing over 90% of humankind and driving the rest underground. Centuries later, one of the few remaining human outposts finally has an opportunity to strike back at the robotic invaders and wipe them out once and for all. Unfortunately, their plan involves recruiting unstable freedom fighter Warren Mitchell and his band of rebels to their cause, who are just as likely to end their society as to save it. But when their cover is blown and the evil robot army marches closer and closer to the Terran survivors, he and a hidden dark secret about his past may be the deciding factor in a final battle where only one side will survive. Will the humans triumph over their cybernetic overlords? Is the future too cool for power tools to use batteries? Well, I guess we should get this out of the way, since it's the first thing you're gonna notice, and there's a lot of it. The most common complaint about this movie, at least what I've heard the most, is that the machines look straight out of a Saturday morning cartoon. And they're right. Allegedly, the models were created and animated in Maya. Now, Maya isn't a bad animation software. I had a class on it in high school, coincidentally around the time this movie came out, and I remember it being pretty accessible and fun to experiment with. However, the program is primarily known for its use in more cartoonish projects. For models and effects that need to look smooth, colorful, exaggerated, more fantastical, and less convincing. Finding Nemo, Frozen, Ice Age, the Ratchet & Clank games, and most of the VeggieTales features have all either used or been made entirely with Maya. And you can tell. They're all distorted, smooth bounty projects that play out like energized cartoons with bright lighting and colors. That's the program's specialization, at least for its first decade or two. And yeah, apparently it was also used to an extent for the official Transformers movies, but there must have been a lot of plugins and post-production texture effects if that's the case. The point is, this software isn't something you want to use if you want something to look real, like it actually belongs next to or even looks like real humans. Or have we forgotten about its use in the original Spider-Man movie, usually derided as the one with the worst effects? Consequentially, the robot models used in this movie are the most distracting element of the whole film. Well, maybe second, but we'll get back to that. I know I haven't been the most forgiving when it comes to the Asylum CGI work so far, but even the models with the most unconvincing animation still looked like they belonged in these environments. Or at least could be tweaked to work as such. These look straight out of an episode of Reboot. From 1994, the Beast Wars robots didn't look this fake. So, yeah, what you heard is true, that this movie has the exact opposite problem of the ogre from Quest for Camelot. Even for the low standards of the studio and the technology their budget could afford at the time, these models look distractingly and embarrassingly out of place and outdated. But, and this is a big but, they are not lazy. Yeah, this is where we take a different direction than you were probably expecting. While the models look cheap, their animation is anything but. Look at the models again. Look at each unique robot. Look at the complex designs each one is given. Look at their multiple moving parts and how smoothly they walk and transition. And look at just how many there are in one shot. Now tell me that this looks lazy. Tell me the animators they got for this movie didn't work their fingers to the bone to create what they did with the minuscule budget and schedule they had to work with. Because I can't. In fact, I'm going to go so far as to say, this is the best animation work we've seen from the Asylum up to this point. Yes, better than the alien war machines from War of the Worlds, or even any of the effects from the Apocalypse. It's actually mind-blowing just how much of a step up the computer-generated rigging is from any of the studio's previous work. I mean, nowadays you can recreate these with a similar model plus a pre-rendered animation pack from a library for $50, but for the time and the heavy constraints the team was working with, it's an impressive result for a B-movie studio in general, let alone one whose models most of the time don't even look finished. Heck, the effects work in general for this movie looks damn impressive, and the movie's intent on showing it off right from the start. Here's the standard title reveal for an Asylum movie. And here's Transmorphers. And that is only the beginning. Just in the first few minutes, we have a string of these robotic hexagons heading to Earth, some giant alien-looking planets, Chicago getting destroyed, a ruined city centuries later, our first look at these transmorphing robotic invaders, a human skull half buried in a wasteland, and an underground futuristic society, with a lot of hustle and bustle in the background. And it just gets more impressive from there, but we'll get back to that. I believe this is the first time the Asylum tapped multiple effects studios to do the digital work, including Tiny Juggernaut, who's credited with the opening effects, Blackthorn VFX, who's credited with the lasers, and Synapse FX, who did practically everything else. Tiny Juggernaut we were introduced to in the last Asylum movie, Blackthorn VFX we'll get back to, and Synapse FX, doesn't have an IMDb page, so they're a little harder to research what they've worked on. But they're apparently a practical and visual effects studio with decades of experience that mostly works on independent projects like fan films and other B-movies, including, of course, a long partnership with the Asylum, most notably work for Sharknado and Z Nation. And they're more than happy to share tutorials on their YouTube page. Now, I don't know if they're still around, their YouTube page hasn't been regularly updated in years, and the copyright date on their website is a few years old, but I'm just going to assume that they're the best thing that ever happened to the Asylum. For a movie studio that challenges itself to make films for $1 million or less, to find a technical studio willing to put this much time and attention into their effects on the budget must have been like finding actual gold in their box of Golden Crisps discount brand knockoff cereal. If their future work is as good, if not better, than what they've shown in this movie, then I can't begin to tell you just how excited I am to see more of their work with the Asylum. If I can identify what movies they worked on, because, like I said, no IMDb or complete credits list. But the effect that impresses me most is that they went to the trouble of building a life-sized Transmorpher robot, or Z-Bot as it's known in the movie. Because, you know, that's not an actual thing that wouldn't get someone's copyright lawyers riled up. I've stated multiple times before that I always prefer practical effects over digital. I'm not saying that I don't enjoy computer animation. Heck, the field has seen such leaps and bounds in the last decade that I sometimes have to be told that the models are computer generated, and not stop motion or even live action. But there's a level of immersion that's lost when you have to convince yourself the mess of pixels and polygons on screen is actually there. I think CGI is at its best when it's used to accentuate what's actually on screen, inflating Helena Bonham Carter's head to match her ego, for example. But the reverse can work just as well, using occasional practical effects to give the computer-generated models more of a tie to reality. In Terminator 2, besides getting a real actor for the T-1000's human form, some shots used animatronics to represent some of the more amorphous forms, reinforcing that there's something actually in front of the actors. Same with most Jurassic Park movies, or even the Lady and the Tramp live-action remake. No matter how good the computer models are, the human brain needs a chance to engage with something real, and refresh its belief that there's something there. And when you're a studio that lacks the hundreds of millions to pay hundreds of digital artists, or the years it takes to finish effects work that, even today, can still be hit or miss, I think it's all the more important to utilize practical effects whenever possible. As they do here, with a solid, full-sized recreation of one of the robots we see throughout the film. Okay, it never moves, and it's just there for them to have something to dissect later, but just the fact that a material version of the robots they're fighting is actually sharing screen space with the live actors helps enforce the idea that this mechanical menace actually exists. I never got that from the purely digital creatures in the last few Asylum movies we looked at, because there is nothing solid for the actors, and by proxy, the audience, to interact with. Even if they just made a long tail out of pillows, trash bags, and spray paint to actually collide with the characters, that would have gone a long way to selling the illusion that the monster on screen actually has a presence. And when even Demonic Toys 2 realizes this and makes an attempt to blur the line between the real and digital worlds, well, you literally have no excuse not to try it for your movie. So, in terms of practical and digital models, and how they made a solid attempt to blend both together, this movie showcases the best effects work the Asylum has shown in a movie up to this point. It's an impressive feat. Not impressive feat enough for a dog to pee on, but hey, they can't all be Academy Award nominated films. But while the effects are a sight to behold, you're not going to be tempted to sit around long enough to behold any of it. Lee Scott is here to helm another film, and he's a name we've become well acquainted with during this look through the Asylum's library. Now by this point, I've probably made it sound like this guy is my personal punching bag. Most of his movies I haven't had that much good to say about, and I have made quite a few jokes at his expense, especially with celebrating how often he dies in his movies. But I want to emphasize that, in terms of the projects he helped churn out the studio, Lee Scott is the best writer-director of the Asylum's early years. Going back and looking at the movies I've already reviewed, it's impressive just how much of an identity each was given. Each one had lore, each one had a different thematic style, each one felt like a grand adventure. And, despite the minuscule budget they were given to work with, each tried their hardest to feel theatrical. Now, technically, even during this era, we have seen better movies from the Asylum, but most of them feel like one-hit wonders. Like the scriptwriter just had this one story they really wanted to tell, or the director had one movie they really wanted to make. So they made it, and then they dropped off the map, either immediately or after a few more minor projects. Lee Scott is the Asylum's most consistent writer. Every movie, it's clear that he doesn't just have a story to tell, but a world for that story to take place in. And there are a lot of worlds he wants to explore. Pirate movies, vampire movies, fantasy adventure movies, even hostage thrillers. Each genre received his full attention. Just the fact he was able to construct a new universe with its own unique mythology for each project is a feat unto itself. Admittedly, it takes a few movies to catch on to his style, hence why I mistakenly said in Beast of Bray Road that I couldn't tell if he had one. But after sitting through movies like The Apocalypse, Snakes on a Train, and Freak Show, films with very repetitive dialogue and flat token characterization, I gain a new appreciation for Pirates of Treasure Island, Dracula's Curse, and yeah, even Frankenstein Reborn. Movies that clearly tried to create unique characters, a script that progresses from beginning to end, and deep world building to flesh out each new story. You could call Lee's writing a lot of things, and I have, but just like the effects of this movie, lazy or apathetic aren't two of them. Of course, as I've pointed out before, his style of writing just doesn't translate well to the screen. I don't know if he's overly proud of his writing, or if he was never given enough time to edit it into a more fitting screenplay, but whenever his characters have to give exposition or express their feelings about something, it all comes out as one big flood of dialogue. In something like a book, this is more forgivable, as the human mind can create its own perception of how a character looks, sounds, and delivers those monologues, and we can simply scan through long passages we deem irrelevant. But for a movie, a visual medium which presents its own interpretations of characters and their personalities, and where it's much more important to get an audience to relate to these live, real-time performances, it's important to translate long sections of writing into something people in general would believably say. Otherwise, it comes across less like someone speaking, and more the writers saying, look at me, notice my style, I don't care about these people, I just want them to read my script. It's the biggest gripe I've had with nearly every single Lee Scott penned movie, and for Transmorphers here, this is his worst offender. Most of his previous movies, I was able to pick out certain moments, separate important plot points from the rest of the dialogue, section off a scene from another scene, and tell that minute 45 was different from minute 6. Here? I can't. I just can't. The dialogue from minute 1 to minute end is just one amorphous lump. People saying things that kind of relate to the situation, but never develop or strengthen anything. Things said in the first act could have been brought up in the third act, and vice versa. And it just goes on, and on, and on, and on! It's just talking, and talking, and talking, and talking!
Why is she still talking?
The movie suffers from the double sin of having too much happening, and yet nothing happening. Which I was going to joke was also the problem with the actual Transformers movie, but no. For all that movie's problems, the plot was incredibly simple. There's a MacGuffin, two different teams of robots want that MacGuffin, and they fight each other for it. And the winner gets to pee on John Turturro. It was an easy story to follow, insultingly so. I don't envy anyone who has tried to create a coherent synopsis for Transmorphers. I had to sit through this movie multiple times for this review, and I still can't say with confidence what happened, when it happened, and why it happened. People will stand around just short of forever, explaining their plans, their relationships, their backstories, and whatever else the writer just had to add. And yet, by the next scene, it feels like it starts all over again. The best I can summarize is that an alien machine invasion occurred in 2014, who killed off most of the population and blotted out the sun, casting the world into an eternal rainy night. Which doesn't sound ideal for a mechanical population, but what do I know? Centuries later, a human outpost is readying a strike against the robotic invaders that will put an end to them once and for all. And they also question why it's only now they've decided to fight back, but it's never brought up again. Their top commanders were wiped out in an earlier strike, so they need to awaken a resistance fighter who tried to overthrow the government years earlier and was cryogenically frozen for his trouble. Because for some reason, which they do eventually give, he's immune to the brain-melting scans the machines use to easily wipe out groups of humans. They somehow find the location of the machine's central command. However, in order to destroy it, they need to take one of the machines alive, which nobody has ever managed to do, and extract the core so it can be reprogrammed at the kill switch. But they also have to keep it alive during the process, or the core will be wiped. And they only have one shot at this because, as soon as they start the autopsy, they give away their location to the machines, and it's one final fight for survival. And then there's a love triangle between the rebel leader, the head commander, and this lady, and the rebel leader's second in command has a history with someone else, and this other lady has histories with everyone, and there's this doctor, and he built a human robot, and it turns out someone else is a robot, but they never told him he was a robot, even though him being a robot is essential to their plans, but what do I know, and somebody's abducted for like 5 minutes, and if that's starting to sound needlessly convoluted, I can literally boil down the whole movie to this. They talk about fighting the robots, and then they fight the robots. Yeah, that's how important these dialogue-heavy scenes ultimately are. Now, admittedly, they managed to make what they're saying sound important, so it's not the Legend of Bloody Jack levels of instantly mind-numbing filler devoid of substance or meaning, but yeah, you're gonna tune out before the movie's half over. And why not? I didn't learn anything important about these characters, or their world, or anything that would come back into play later. At least nothing where I had to backtrack and go, oh yeah, they did mention that. That was set up to have a payoff later. You could watch this entire movie on mute and get the exact same experience. Which might actually be the best way to watch this, but we'll get back to that. And yet, despite having practically no setup, the movie still tries to have revelatory scenes. Sequences that are supposed to deliver earth-shaking new information and change the way we view the movie. For you see, it's revealed that these robotic invaders that everybody thought was sent by a hostile alien race are the hostile alien race.
What a twist!
Yeah, no, I can't even use that clip because this is not a twist. I mean, it might have been a twist if we saw the aliens beforehand, like there was a picture of their race broadcast to humanity before the invasion began, so that's what everyone thought the aliens looked like. Maybe the commander would have a picture of them on her wall to remind everyone who they're fighting. Or how much fun would it be if they had a rebel alien beam to Earth and offer to help the resistance? They can be human, or at least humanoid, with one of those headbands with the little springy balls waving around to show that they're alien. Then they reveal during the autopsy that most of their race turned themselves into Cold War machines who have been conquering galaxy after galaxy. Like the Cybermen from Doctor Who, as long as there's some basis as to how the resistance realized the aliens and the war machines were one and the same. As is, not only am I confused how we were supposed to know that, but how did the characters that actually exist in this movie's world know that? And no, it doesn't add anything to the plot, doesn't affect the Terran's plan in any way, or change how they see the robotic overlords. It's just yet another thing that happens. Yeah, file it away with the gigaquads of other information they think is important, but isn't. It's as big a twist as the main character being revealed as a robot. Oh yeah, Warren's a robot, by the way, which kinda sorta plays a part in the plot, but in such a weak last-minute way, it could have been cut entirely and we never notice. Save for another late-in-the-game sequence that could have also been cut. I guess they're trying for some symbolism, subverting how something who everyone thought was pure machine is evil and who everyone thought was pure human is good, maybe hinting that morality isn't dependent on your organic or mechanical components. But I pulled that conclusion straight out of thin air, because the movie doesn't explore those themes at all. Maybe if they did explore those themes, actually give some character and background to these characters, these might have been effective twists. But as presented, the movie doesn't know the difference between a big reveal and... Heck, the movie is so boring and takes so long between battle scenes that, a month after principal filming had wrapped, the studio actually ordered the first act to be reshot with more action sequences. Yes, even by the standards of the Asylum, this movie was so devoid of substance that they were willing to get most of the actors back and shell out a few $100,000 more for effects work just to give buyers and distributors the barest sense that something is happening. And given their usual churn out, I can only imagine how coma-inducing mundane the movie's original opening must have been to get a notoriously skinflint studio to step in and order costly reshoots. No, seriously, I think we deserve to know just what comprised those original first 15 minutes. Somebody, please, put together a special edition version of the DVD with the original opening as a bonus feature. And while you're at it, release the Hank cut of Freak Show. The characters don't help make this movie any more engaging. And I use the term characters very generously. I can't even call the personalities one note, because that suggests that they have a unique identity and stand out from everyone else. At best, they're half note. This guy's kind of a rogue. This guy's sort of playing it like he's sleazy. This person is thinking about being in command but doesn't quite reach that point. And everyone else is there. They do a thing, so someone else can do a thing. I guess Warren gets a cool scene where he's demonstrating the importance of following orders without hesitation or question, but it's still a scene I feel could have been filled in by most of these militaristic characters, and I'd never think, I feel that could have been done better by that other guy. As much as I trashed Dragon or Pirates of Treasure Island, I could tell everyone apart. Something done by one character would have just been weird if it was done by someone else instead. Here, it's like they cut a stack of Post-its into paper dolls, then plastered several of them on the walls of each scene. That's ultimately how interchangeable everyone is. You know, contrary to common belief, it's really not that hard to give characters engaging scenes that develop not only their personalities, but the world around them. Take this script, find a place right before a big expository setup, place 2 characters on set, and have them say this. So, did you catch the Hoverball Championship last night? Oh god, don't remind me. Put money on the Astro Mulchers, huh? They would have won! They would have won! But Nova Hoffman just had to disintegrate right at the 300-yard mark. Ooh, yeah, hate to be the team cloning technician who had to take the fall for that vat. I know! When they announced the modifications to Nova number 336, all of my friends are screaming at the view screen, 5 arms is enough! You don't need more than 3 eyes! Pasting a face on the back of his head is going to make the mixture unstable! And now the committee is talking about reducing all gene modifications to no more than 3 per player. And that's going to make the game boring. Especially since at least one of them will have to go to making their fence stick to the wall or they're going to lose home court advantage. Well, that's what you get for supporting the cheating Astro Mulchers. Mecha Melds forever, yeah! Oh, sure, like they've never overspliced a player before. I don't remember anything. Farg Blatanius. Hey, like I said, I don't remember anything. That never happened. Deny it all you like, Mecha Moron. That's not gonna change. And then the commanding officer comes in, they stand at attention, and the Situation Room scene begins. Yes, it's still exposition that doesn't add to the overall story, but it's something that gives character, develops the world, and provides a bit of levity to what is otherwise an overly serious tone. If The Mandalorian could make a funny scene utilizing 2 unnamed scout troopers, then why can't any movie? Don't be afraid to Tarantino it up. And no, the acting quality isn't any better. To be fair, I can tell that most of the actors are trying to give a fair performance, but they're given so little to work with, and clearly no time to develop their characters, that they all come across as, well, as most Lee Scott-directed characters we've seen so far. Again, it really speaks multitudes to Lee Scott's clout and charisma to convince so many talented actors to be in his movies. And they usually have the largest casts featured in Asylum movies at the time, with Dracula's Curse his largest, and arguably best movie made with the studio. But they still have to recite the complex, exposition-heavy lines that make up his writing. It's impressive that they can deliver the dialogue from their encyclopedia-length scripts, but I never believed they're established as characters that would actually say these things from their encyclopedia-length scripts. Just have each actor breathlessly recite several dozen paragraphs of exposition every scene, and anything else is a luxury. Heck, the writing gets so redundant and expository that at one point, 2 characters state the exact same fact one after another.
They've breached all perimeters.
Just broken through the perimeter, General.
Look, ramps!
We can use these as ramps!
The only character that really stood out to me was Dr. Alexevich, played by Michael Tower, the team's inventor and science expert. His dialogue is also an unnatural exposition dump, but he delivers it like an awkward antisocial scientist, someone who doesn't know how to speak naturally. And it mostly works. He's not delivering his lines like he's showing off that he memorized them, he gives the impression that he knows what he's talking about. He's just not used to addressing large aggressive crowds, and he's trying his best to dumb things down for his shoot first, ask questions later audience. And later, after he's grown more comfortable being part of the group, he gets the brag about building robots almost indistinguishable from humans, and you can tell he's trying to show off. An attitude that disappears when he learns he has to go into the heat of battle, and he's never shot a gun before. There's an awkward charm to his performance, like a poor man's Egon Spengler, that's sorely missing from most of the cast. And he gets the closest to what passes for laughs in this movie. And hey, if you can't get Jeff Goldblum, the budget version works just as well. The only other standout performance is Xandria Lux, played by Shaylee Scott, this soldier who soldiers on, I don't know. She also gives her role some over-the-top energy, But while Dr. Alexevich was awkwardly charming, she's just awkward. She speaks in this overly breathy, mocking tone, enunciating every syllable while inserting pauses into most sentences, like she's playing some grandiose villain, but she's one of the good guys. And all the while, she's fighting with the recruits and insulting others to their face, so I just have no idea what she's going for. Whatever performance she's attempting, it comes across as less a battle-hardened, take-no-shits badass, and more like the sister from Troll 2. Also, she gets into physical fights with other barely dressed female soldiers, because even Lee Scott has admitted he's a dirty old man. The rest of the cast list is comprised almost entirely of actors we've become very familiar with by this point, and most of whom are frequent Lee Scott collaborators. Normally, this is where I go more into detail about who plays whom, but since nobody else really stands out and they're mostly interchangeable, there's really no point. Though I will give a shout out to actress, singer, model, film producer, real estate broker, and professional wrestler Amy Weber, playing the love interest Karina Nadir in her first and only Asylum movie. And second Lee Scott project, after his film debut Art House. There's something else to mention about the cast, but it's a long bit of explaining with a drastic tonal shift, and I'm trying to focus on the movie itself right now, so I'll bring it up near the end. Trust me though, it'll be worth it. Or maybe it won't, I don't know. The only reason the actors don't blend into the background is because the sets are even more boring. Now give everyone credit, most of the interior shots were actually built for the movie. Something surprisingly rare for this studio, and where most previous instances have come across as very high school stage play. So I do acknowledge that the set designers put a lot of time and effort into building what they were instructed to build. And the fluorescent lighting and dryer tubes on the walls are an economical way to convey a futuristic underground military bunker, as well as provide everything with an ethereal lighting scheme that gives a bit of fantastical feel to this sci-fi movie. That said, it looks like every sci-fi movie ever, particularly every sci-fi spaceship corridor ever. Except somehow even less stand out. I can tell that Star Trek corridor is from Star Trek, or that Red Dwarf takes place on Red Dwarf. Every single room in this movie could be inserted into any sci-fi show and I would never notice a style change. It doesn't help that every single room also looks the same. I would not be surprised if they only built 3 or 4 sets and then just moved around some of the furniture to change the Situation Room into a dorm room. At the very least, have one location be set in a completely different area than the rest, i.e. not a set. Like there's a bar or even a dance club, but it just looks like a bar or a dance club, just everyone is wearing their military outfits. Somewhere that gives us a change from empty, pale blue hallways and crew quarters. I never thought I'd have to praise Space Mutiny for its eclectic set designs and less claustrophobic filming locations. Heck, even the space outfits stand out more. In all the wrong ways, but still. Actually, they kind of did change things up set-wise. I'm assuming after principal filming concluded, the original sets were taken down or straight up destroyed. So, when the studio ordered reshoots, they had to find new sets to film on. And the sets they were able to rent were originally built for the cult TV show Firefly and its movie sequel Serenity. And, give them credit, I couldn't tell that the new 10 minutes or so took place in a completely different location than the rest of the flick. Though to the movie's detriment, I couldn't tell that the new 10 minutes or so took place in a completely different location than the rest of the flick. Upon rewatch, they do look a lot bigger, with more depth to the walls and quite a few more props and background elements than future scenes. But it all still looks like one big gray box that, again, I had to be told was a different set than what was actually built for the movie. I guess it's a testament to the brilliant writing and casting of Firefly that the show wasn't held back by mostly uninspired set designs. Still, like the Carnival set they were able to lease for Freak Show, I guess I should congratulate the studio for managing to find a professionally built, somewhat famous, previously used set. That's still too good for the movie they filmed on it. But the main reason why I couldn't tell these were completely different sets is probably because the camera wouldn't stay still long enough to let me notice anything. Yeah, after a string of movies with good to fantastic cinematography, this movie joins Super Croc in being one of the shakiest I've seen from the Asylum. Apparently there are technical issues with the Steadicam, but in that case, get a tripod or set the camera down on a pile of bricks. Unless it's a found footage movie where the gimmick is that we're supposed to be watching it through the eyes of an unskilled camera operator, I don't want to watch something that looks like it was filmed in the middle of an 8.5 scale earthquake. A movie literally called Earthquake is less shaking than this. Heck, Earthquake the Ride doesn't leave me as disoriented as this movie does. But if the indoor shots are bad, the outdoor shots are worse. Always jerking around, trying to decide which actor to focus on in the middle of the night. Now, huge credit, the outdoor scenes are lit just enough to make out everything happening on screen so we don't get another Killers or Legion of the Dead. But even that can go wrong. They use bright flashing lights to simulate the occasional lightning and thunder for this never-ending rainstorm. And sometimes the strobing is so bad, especially during the reshot opening scenes, I have to show them in slow motion, because I'm legitimately worried they may give someone an epileptic seizure. And this is another Stephen Parker movie, who has turned in great work in the past, but for some reason has just lost it for his last few projects. Maybe he wasn't given enough time to set things up, or the way he was instructed to set up shots conflicted with his experience, or he had to work with too many inexperienced camera operators. But if I were to show someone Dracula's Curse, Hitchhiker, and this movie, and tell them they all had the same director of photography, I would be getting the weirdest looks right now. Besides from the fact I just made someone watch Dracula's Curse, Hitchhiker, and this movie. Not a good way to guarantee a second date. The music, I barely remember. A lot of the calmer scenes don't even have music. And when it comes in for the more action-packed sequences, it's mostly just pseudo-dramatic background noise. The kind that goes maybe with an electric guitar shredding a few notes, and someone setting their keyboard to the quiet setting for the more inspirational sections. I'm sorry, I'm sure people like Chris Ridenhour and Eliza Swenson work really hard at getting these scores ready for a movie that has to be on shelves in a month. But when I remember the free YouTube library tracks I play in the background for these reviews more than the instrumentals people were paid money to compose, well, can't do anything about that. Though I'll give it this, the intro music that mixes hard rock, techno, and strings that kind of sounds like the theme to the Men in Black movie, not bad. The scene editing is competent, it's edited linearly with no flashbacks or anything told out of sequence, and is mostly free of annoying layering tricks or transitions, save for a few crossfades at the end. The most ambitious it gets are a few scenes where they'll play separate shots side by side, like this is suddenly an episode of The Amazing Race. Which, if that's why they were edited that way, and we're seeing two teams of humans and or robots racing toward a goal to see who gets there first, that might have been fine. But no, it's just here at the beginning and the middle, serves as much purpose as the split screen from Crocodile 2, and I don't know. What else can I say but...
Thank you for that.
But it's the sound mixing that really drags the movie down. Now, The Asylum is no stranger to its use of ADR for many of their movies, and the results have ranged from barely noticeable to... yikes. However, Transmorphers is unique in that it's the first movie to have its audio completely looped. Yes, every single actor re-recorded their dialogue in post to dub over the final product. Again, I had to be told this, as I didn't notice the first few times I saw this movie. But watching it again, yeah, there is a slight delay between most of the actors speaking and their lips moving, and in some cases some barely audible clipping. But considering the audio is at the same volume level for most of the movie, the background noise doesn't just cut out when the characters stop talking, and they kept in a slight echo to match the interior shots, this might be the studio's best dub work up to this point. Or at least for an instance where I recognize there is dubbing. So that means that the final sound mixing is great, right? Since all the dialogue was re-recorded in post, they had more control over the audio levels, and they could balance it out with the sound effects and background music, right? It's the exact same problem as Super Croc, except, unbelievably, it's worse. Like Super Croc, the backing tracks will completely drown out any and all dialogue. But the scenes where people are talking that the music is too loud to hear them are much longer here, resulting in minutes where people are just flapping their lips like a fish for as audible as they are. And while Super Croc has the smallest excuse that maybe the dialogue wasn't recorded consistently throughout, hence why the volume fluctuates, this movie's dialogue is on a separate audio track, so there's much less of a reason why they couldn't adjust the volume scene by scene so the characters are speaking over the background noise. Thankfully, like Super Croc, they fixed this issue for later streaming releases, so now you can hear every meaningless word said in the heat of battle. But if you went out and bought the DVD, as I did, I bet you're feeling as cheated as anyone who bought tickets to the last night. So, yeah, the bulk of this movie is garbage. For something considered one of the Asylum's most well-known movies, most of the elements are the same low-effort, near-directionless rush jobs we've become accustomed to, and in some cases are the worst we've ever seen them. It's slow, it's boring, it's overly pretentious for something that's supposed to be stupid fun, and it leaves no impact afterwards. For a good 50 to 60 minutes of runtime, it's impossible to figure out why this movie stands out so much from the rest of the Asylum's catalog. But then we get to the action scenes, and they are glorious. Yeah, when the humans and robots actually start fighting each other, the movie becomes surprisingly fun. I mean, look at this. Look at this! Look at this F-off enormous robot that somehow manages to sneak up on the resistance fighters, then proceeds to turn into a tank and blast them away with oversized laser bolts. And tell me that's not the best thing you've seen today. And the fun is just beginning. We have jetpacks, we have lightning guns, we have giant buzzsaw hands, we have explosive frisbees, we have futuristic jets, we have hover bikes, and we have more explosions and laser blasts than an episode of Code Lyoko. While the scenes with the humans seem dedicated to saying as much as they can and leaving as little of an impact as possible, the effects team for the robots clearly took what little they were given and did as much with it as they could. It would have been so easy for them to use the same models for every single robot and just repeat certain animations over and over again in reaction to the live actors, because, hey, the studio has clearly demonstrated so much care and detail for its effects work in the past. But because there's such a variety to the robots' movements and the weapons and fighting styles between the machines and the human resistance, each of these conflicts feel action-packed and unique. And small details like this robot being nonchalantly crushed by a much bigger robot go a long way to providing scope and even personality to this world. For a studio that didn't have to spend this much on effects work, and an effects team that didn't need to try this hard to make their model stand out, well, I'm glad they did. The effects are greatly complemented by the fact that this is probably the best compositing work we've seen from an Asylum flick. I've made it no secret that the Asylum hasn't exactly wowed me with their attempts to mix computer-generated models with live-action actors and settings, most of which just look like they placed actors in front of a flat green screen or layered the models on top of the rest of the footage and called it a day. And yeah, there's a lot of that here too. Quite a few effects shots are the same quick layering jobs we've seen from other effects-laden Asylum movies, most of which don't last more than 2 seconds at a time. Even with CGI scenes that are clearly one continuous shot, but they cut in reaction shots from the humans for some reason. But when the editors decide to get ambitious, it looks surprisingly good. A lot of the shots with robots and humans on screen at the same time, I can tell they went to the effort of inserting the models into the live footage. And they even bothered to mask the models, so robots in the distance aren't accidentally layered over the actors in the foreground. And while most model insert shots still don't last that long, a few do. And it's thrilling to see these battling humans and robots sharing screen space. Especially for one sequence, where they actually molded a robot glove to convincingly present an actor held down and about to be sawed in half by said robot. Clearly, there was a lot more communication between the filming crew and effects team than the usual Asylum film to set up these scenes and sync up the live actors with the animated robots. It gets especially ambitious with these unbroken tracking shots that can last for almost a minute, and that usually include at least one robot that also has to be tracked properly. Proving that, even in his least impressive projects, Stephen Parker can still impress. I also have to give huge props that most of the explosions are actual explosions they set off, each prefaced by a laser blast to further blur the line between the digital and real worlds. And, as far as I can tell, each blast is tracked perfectly, from being fired from a gun to impact, which is something I can't even say for most muzzle flashes from previous Asylum movies. If the credits are to be believed, we also have Lee Scott to thank for the laser work, under the alias Blackthorn VFX, as he likes to use the name of his production company whenever possible. Lee Scott has been credited for digital effects work for previous movies, so I guess it's another hat on top of the ludicrously tall stack he already wears on his head. Again, even for the time, this all looks hilariously cheap and outdated, with a lot of shots looking like they'd be right at home in a 3DO or Sega CD FMV cutscene. But, like one of those games, they brim with so much cheesy fun, they're impossible to dislike. It's like watching a playthrough of an FMV game, except with the scenes in much higher resolution than the systems at the time could process. Or that 2003 Game Over movie. Same thing, really. Heck, the ending battle sequence is so much fun, it's easy to forget that I have no idea what's going on. Yeah, nothing new there, I know. The best I can grasp is that they transplant the kill switch into Mitchell, who then goes with the group to find the robot central command center, where they can upload it and end robot kind. Except they're immediately swarmed by robotic legions tipped off to the Resistance's location by the upload, so they also have to activate some electromagnets to hopefully stun the forces long enough for Mitchell to complete his mission. And from there, I don't know. Some people die, robots get blasted to shrapnel, Mitchell is the only one who can go into an area since he's a machine and their sensors only track humans, and there's a lot of fighting, and a lot of fighting, and a lot of fighting, and then they spice things up with a lot of fighting. For nearly 20 minutes, it's just people shooting, people screaming, people shouting disconnected orders from a bunker, and people staring at screens that are giving them a lot more information than we, the audience, are getting.
This is an impressive fight, though. I'm glad I'm facing towards it.
And all throughout, I have no idea how close the robots or the human infiltration group are getting to their respective goals, or how worried I should feel about the ultimate destruction of either side. Now, on the one hand, I should be incredibly frustrated. It's the final showdown, a lot was supposedly accomplished, and yet I still have no idea what's going on, who any of these characters are, or why I should care if any of them die, or even if humanity itself gets vaporized from off the face of the earth. But when the end conflict involves hover bikes, aerial dogfights between futuristic jets and flying robots, machines being trapped in an electrical spiderweb, and a robot command center that's revealed to also be a giant transformer robot, yeah, any and all queries become irrelevant. The millions and millions of questions you may have come up with while watching this movie can simply be answered with the phrase, giant transforming robot. Who are these people? Giant transforming robot. What's going on? Giant transforming robot. Why should I or anyone else care? Take 2 giant transforming robots and call me in the morning. Now, it's nowhere near as exciting as the climax to the actual Transformers movie, but at this point, I don't care. This is my reward for having to sit through some of the most boring dreck I've had to watch for this retrospective, and I'm milking it for all it's worth. You say none of this makes sense, and it looks like a pre-alpha trailer for a Starship Troopers video game? Well, my brain turned off halfway through the movie, and whatever sparks are left are being entertained by a battle pandering to my love of fighting robots and explosions, so go gadget couch potato. Oh, that's not from the actual franchise? I don't care. I'm a potato now. Anyway, Mitchell blows up the command center and all the robots go boom. The end. This movie is awful. Except when it's not. The characters are boring, the sets are bland, the dialogue is meaningless, the camera shakes way too much, and while the recording and post-dub work is impressive by Asylum standards, the sound mixing may just be the worst we've heard yet. For a movie where nobody shuts up, I couldn't understand a single thing being said, nor could I care less about the relationships between these characters, or even the struggles of this resistance in general. In terms of storytelling, audio, and convincing me to give a shit, this is one of the worst Asylum movies I've seen yet. But then we get to the fighting, and the robots, and the gun blasts, and all the other crazy stuff they stuff into these action scenes, and suddenly, the film is one of the Asylum's best. I can't begin to tell you just how much fun I had just watching these robots move around, pull out different weapons, transform into various vehicles, and even fight with the actors on screen, as brief as those parts were. Every scene with the robots is a literal blast. Whether it's a robot turning its hand into a buzzsaw, robots being sucked towards giant electromagnets, a giant tank robot managing to sneak up on a group of resistance fighters, and, need we forget, giant transforming command center. And with the various robot models, how they move, how they interact with each other, the multiple weapons they pull out of nowhere, and just how well they're integrated into the live footage, there will always be something new to notice. It's the best looking, most entertaining effects work we've seen from the Asylum yet. Leagues above even War of the Worlds, and definitely on a perch it'll be difficult to knock down from. I guess my best advice is to just watch the scenes with the humans and robots fighting, and skip the rest. Considering the Gordian knot that is this movie's exposition, you won't miss anything important, and you can just focus on the enjoyably cheesy CGI robot action on loan from a late 90s Saturday morning cartoon. When it comes to this movie, one half shall stand, and one half shall fall. But that brings us to the burning question that I, and probably a lot of you, have had since before this video. Why this movie? Out of the nearly 50 movies the Asylum had produced in its first decade, and the dozens of movies it helped distribute during that time, why was it Transmorphers that finally garnered them mainstream attention and led to their title as the Mockbuster King? Well, I have a theory. While they have made multiple knockoffs by this point, including quite a few cash-ins on films that remain popular today, their targeted movies up to this point have been just that. Movies. Popular movies, yes, mostly critical and/or financial successes, but nothing that left that much of an impact. They paraded into theaters, made some money, then quietly slipped out. Maybe gaining a small cult following, but ultimately retreating into the recesses of DVD bargain bins and streaming services as just another source of entertainment for the curious or bored. Transformers, however, is not just a series, it's a way of life. In the same vein as Star Wars, Star Trek, Lego, Lord of the Rings, Pokemon, My Little Pony, and Troll 2, Transformers is a phenomenon that's garnered not just fans, but people who dedicate their entire lives to the franchise. Whether it's collecting the toys, watching the shows and movies, attending conventions centered solely around the series, for millions of people spanning multiple generations, Transformers is just as important as air, food, or water. And, like any fan base, if there's something even remotely similar to what they like, they must know all about it. It's why failed toy lines like Robotics and GoBots are still talked about and analyzed to this day, even though they haven't gotten any new media or mainstream attention in almost 4 decades. And, let's face it, the Asylum knew exactly what they were doing. There is no way they would have poured this much attention, this much money into one of their projects, even going so far as to order reshoots, if they just expected the same sales numbers as their regular ripoff. They knew there was already a horde of ravenous robot enthusiasts ready and waiting to sink their teeth into something that dared to resemble something they liked. And if they were going to feed this pool of piranhas, well, might as well give them something with a hint of flavor to it. And clearly, their gamble paid off. Okay, I can't find any sales numbers for the movie, but thanks to fanatical fan bases and early movie streaming services, it easily became the Asylum's most popular movie, and the film that gained them mainstream recognition outside of small online message board groups and Blockbuster employees. It's what introduced me to the Asylum, and I'm sure it introduced a lot of other people to them too, before that certain shark movie took over. And it's the success of Transmorphers and the studio's newfound popularity that would start yet another transition, meaning more effect-laden movies, more genre experimentation, a wider appeal to audiences, and of course, more movies made every year. Unfortunately, it also meant the departure of many people associated with the studio. Yeah, for many of the names that have practically become synonymous with the Asylum, this is their final acting project with them. So if you would join me in bidding a fond farewell to Matthew Wolfe, Griff First, Eliza Swenson, Sarah Hall, Alexandra Boylan, Thomas Downey, Jeff Denton, and Rhett Giles, and best wishes to the upcoming retirement of Shaylee Scott, Michael Tower, David Schick, Noel Thurman, Jessica Bork, Christian Quintrall, and Marat Glazer. Heck, Rhett Giles only had time to lend his voice to this project, probably so he could rush to make his cameo in an episode of Lost. Griff First would return to direct several Asylum features, beginning his career as an independent director-producer he has to this day. Eliza Swenson continues to create music for modern Asylum movies as a main or additional composer, and some actors, like Sarah Leaving and of course Kim Little, still make the occasional appearance in an Asylum flick. But for many of the names we've become well acquainted with by this point, this is their final on-screen appearance in an Asylum movie. Heck, it's not just actors. Stephen Parker, longtime cinematographer and Lee Scott collaborator, also bids farewell to the studio after this flick, as does production designer and occasional actor Kurt Altschwager. Even Sherry Strain, executive producer and one of the founding members of the Asylum, resigned around this time, being replaced with frequent Asylum writer and producer Paul Bales. Though she continues to produce movies to this day with other studios, including a brief reunion with the Asylum in 2017. And sadly, after nearly 20 productions and acting roles, including a cameo here, but he doesn't die or play a significant role so I didn't bring it up, 2007 would see Lee Scott's final contributions to the studio. Okay, technically he's also in the next one, but we'll get to that in that video. And frankly, I am beyond curious why. What triggered a sudden mass exodus that resulted in the departure of most of the studio's talent? I don't know. Maybe it was a restructuring decision from the studio heads, maybe there were payment disputes, maybe certain contracts expired and the studio just didn't want to renew them, maybe they were just tired of not being given the creative control or challenging roles they desired. At this point, it's all complete speculation. But it did lead to a change in the studio's casting procedure, as most future movies would follow the example of the Da Vinci Treasure, featuring cast lists comprised mostly of one-offs, with 1 or 2 B or C-list actors headlining the DVD to entice potential buyers with a familiar name. Names they could now afford on a regular basis, with a wider market and more money-making opportunities thanks to Transmorphers. I guess in its own way, this Transformers knockoff was just as important as the real thing. But we're not going to see its impact just yet. As with War of the Worlds, they still had quite a few movies in the queue to finish up before they could really get ambitious, and given the comparatively exorbitant budget of Transformers, they would be much cheaper and easier to finish flicks to hopefully rake back in some of that money. Are they still films that have at least one reason to sit through them? Well, guess we'll find out when we look at their next Mockbuster next time.